Hey everyone, What If Fan here, bringing you another exciting part of What If Fishing System in Food Wars World. You can find the fanfic title and the original author's name on my Patreon page. Make sure to check it out and show them some love. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. Alright, let's jump into it. Chapter 91, Arrival at WGO, Temporary Third Class Officer Exam. I see. Then I'll be in your care for the upcoming period, Irina-san, Hisako-san. Although Yuki didn't know why Senzaemon and Mana Nakiri made this decision, he wouldn't lose anything from it. Having two beauties with him wasn't bad either. And honestly, he did need assistance. Although his culinary skills were very strong, and all other aspects were very strong as well, that didn't mean he liked doing those tedious tasks. Putting aside Irina Nakiri for the moment, Hisako Arado was the perfect assistant. Having handled all sorts of chores for Irina for years, Hisako was basically a professional in this aspect. Since the Nakiri family was sending them over, he naturally wouldn't refuse. We should be the ones saying that. Although Irina Nakiri was an arrogant person, she wasn't delusional. She was very clear about the gap between their skills and Yuki's. While the WGO was technically her mother's territory, she hadn't seen her mother yet, and relying on connections all the time wasn't ideal, so she still had to count on Yuki for this next little while. After speaking, the three boarded the private jet. Of course, the absurdly wealthy Nakiri family wouldn't take a normal plane. They had a private jet. Yuki naturally enjoyed the private jet treatment as well. It had to be said, these rich people really did know how to enjoy life. On the plane, Irina and Hisako discussed many things about cuisine with Yuki. Mainly, because they weren't very familiar, they couldn't really talk about other things, so the conversation could only revolve around cooking. And Yuki's knowledge of culinary matters was naturally not something Irina and Hisako could match. They were still too young. So, after some discussion, their conversation shifted from an equal exchange into something more like students asking a teacher questions. It could only be said that the difference in their culinary skills was simply too wide. What's more, Yuki also possessed numerous secret techniques. His knowledge reserve in this aspect wasn't even comparable to those so-called veteran chefs. So, when Yuki discussed culinary matters with others, they would be led by Yuki, eventually turning into a Q&A session. You two, although I know you still have many questions, we're almost there. So, please keep any further questions for later. After all, we'll be working together for the next while, Yuki said with a smile. Hearing this, Irina Nakiri and Hisako Arado then realized they were almost at their destination. Although such a long flight should have taken quite a bit of time, for these two, it seemed like they had blinked and arrived. It could only be said that when one was completely absorbed in something, their mind would be fully immersed in it, causing them to lose track of time's passage. Just now, they were in such a state. Because many of their inner questions had been answered, time passed very quickly. Our apologies, Yuki. We've taken so much of your time. After coming back to their senses, the two quickly apologized. This whole time, they had been the ones asking questions, and Yuki had been the one providing answers. Yuki wasn't a school teacher, he had no obligation to answer their inquiries. Yet Yuki had unreservedly helped them answer questions, so they were very grateful and also apologized. There's no need to be so polite. At Polar Star, I often help the others, so I'm used to it, Yuki said with a smile. The people he dealt with at Polar Star weren't comparable to these two, so naturally, the questions he answered were more numerous. He didn't feel it was annoying at all. Actually, when answering questions for others, Yuki himself was also thinking, and his food honor was continuously improving. For Yuki, helping others was also a form of accelerating his own growth. However, Yuki usually only helped his own people and wouldn't teach anything to outsiders. What he did now was merely answering Irina and Hisako's questions, which was very different from teaching the Polar Star residents. Since Yuki said so, the two didn't say anything more but kept it in mind. After the plane landed, the group took a car to WGO headquarters. Arriving at WGO, Yuki and the other two met and who was waiting there? And was Mana Nakiri's secretary. Her purpose for being here was very simple, to take them to meet Mana. After all, this entire matter was arranged by Mana Nakiri. And Mana was now very interested in Yuki's cooking, wanting to know whether Yuki's dishes were truly as amazing as her father claimed. This could also be considered a test to test whether Yuki could handle the position of third-class officer and to test whether Yuki was really her hope. So there's going to be another test? Irina Nakiri and Hisako Arata were a bit taken aback hearing An's explanation. Isn't that normal? Yuki's age is a factor, and plus, Yuki's appointment is a special case. Although this third-class officer position is only temporary, during his tenure, he holds the same authority as other third-class officers. Such an exceptional situation naturally creates dissatisfaction among other officers. To prevent further problems and reduce some of the burden for the special class officer, this assessment is unavoidable. And gave a simple explanation. In Yuki's ears, this explanation was part truth, part PR. The truthful part was probably about smoothing things over for him. His sudden appointment would not sit well with those who had been here for years. So there were definitely some who would be looking for trouble. And Yuki was practically certain that even if he proved his culinary skill, there would still be those with objections. Human nature was like this. Yuki wasn't a naive student, so he naturally understood the stakes. As for alleviating pressure for Mana Nakiri, Yuki didn't think Mana Nakiri was under any pressure. She was WGO's sole special class officer, holding immense power. She was the one who directly had the Midnight Chefs included in the Blue competition in the original story. Mana Nakiri at that time didn't care about any pressure. Now, with Yuki as a mere temporary third-class officer, if there were any pressure on her, it wasn't worth even discussing. Yuki suspected that and was saying this to make him have a favorable impression of Mana Nakiri. After all, the God's tongue problem required Yuki's help. So, making a good impression on him was quite necessary. Soon, led by An, they arrived at a kitchen. Several people were already present. The person sitting at the head of the table was Mana Nakiri. It had to be said, Mana Nakiri was truly worthy of being Irina's mother. Even though her body was already frail, she was still a striking beauty. With just one glance, Yuki understood Mana's physical condition. If this continued, her body probably wouldn't hold up for more than a few years before completely collapsing. At that point, wanting to continue living, she'd have to rely entirely on life support in the ICU. Welcome! Yuki-kun, I've already heard quite a lot about you from father. I won't waste time on pleasantries. And explain the situation, right? The choice is yours, Mana Nakiri said, cutting straight to the chase after a brief greeting. This test required Yuki's consent. If Yuki didn't agree, then there would be no need for an assessment, and Yuki could just leave. Besides Mana, a special class officer, there were also a few first-class officers here. They were also present to witness Yuki's culinary skills. As for whether anyone was unhappy with Mana's arrangement, there certainly were, but there was nothing they could do. Mana Nakiri held the highest authority. Ms. An already told me. I'll take this assessment. Yuki agreed. Since Mana Nakiri wanted to see his skills, it was a good opportunity for Yuki to also see if his current cooking could negate Mana's God's tongue. This time, Yuki was especially meticulous. He knew very well that Mana Nakiri's God's tongue was fully developed, not something Irina's could compare to. So, to make her God's tongue malfunction, he had to use the skills he was best at. Yuki's best weapon was undoubtedly Inferno. After all, Inferno would grow stronger as he did. So, this time, the dish Yuki decided to make was 7-country unification noodle dish. For this dish, every aspect involved Yuki's greatest strengths. And Yuki's culinary heart was also extremely well suited for this dish. If even this couldn't handle Mana's God's tongue, then Yuki could only try again later when his skills were even higher. He estimated Mana Nakiri also didn't hold much hope for it now, probably just wanting to assess his skills. As for Irina Nakiri, she looked at her mother with a complex expression and remained silent. What she wanted to say wasn't suitable for this place. Mana Nakiri only glanced at Irina out of the corner of her eye. She hadn't seen Irina in so many years. While she had seen photos and videos of her daughter growing up, seeing her in person now, it was impossible to be completely unmoved. With a single glance, Yuki noticed Mana Nakiri's heart rate increasing when she looked at Irina. Clearly, it wasn't that she didn't care about her daughter. Yuki wasn't planning on getting involved in other people's family matters. Whether this mother and daughter reconciled had nothing to do with him. He was only responsible for fixing the god's tongue. As for Hisako Arado on the side, she was looking at her young lady with concern. She knew Irina's current mental state better than anyone. However, she also couldn't say much and could only watch silently. The three were currently in a strange atmosphere, something only they themselves could feel. Because everyone else's attention was on Yuki. At WGO, whatever ingredients Yuki needed, he just had to select them from the ingredient database, and someone would deliver them. Yuki had already decided on his dish and quickly completed his selection. If I'm not mistaken, we plan to inform him about the assessment only after he arrived. Has he already decided on what to make in such a short time? One first-class officer said. Although there wasn't a specific theme for this assessment, Yuki's almost instant decision was still somewhat surprising. That's right. I told him about it only after we arrived here. Clearly, he is very confident. Anne replied. Since Yuki's chef-level assessments after intermediate had all been handled by Tatsuki, bypassing the normal WGO procedures. They weren't very clear about Yuki's true level. Of course, everyone also knew that such things couldn't be hidden forever. No one would be stupid enough to go through such lengths just for a deception. But they truly couldn't connect Yuki's culinary skills with his age. Compared to Yuki, they, who were once called geniuses, seemed completely mediocre. Their common sense also told them that Yuki's case was an anomaly. So, they still held some doubts. No need to discuss it for now, everyone. We'll all know once he finishes his dish. Mana Nakiri said with a smile. There was no need for discussion. The person was already here. In an hour or two, or even just a few dozen minutes, Yuki's skill would be revealed to them. Mana Nakiri having said this, the others didn't say anything more. At this moment, Yuki had already begun his preparations. The main ingredients for this dish totaled 7: flour, flounder, sea bream, bamboo shoots, cabbage, wood ear mushrooms, cellophane noodles, and beef. Besides these, there were also other seasonings. After Yuki took out his 7-star knives, the appearance of these knives once again drew everyone's attention. Knives with such unique shapes and in such numbers appearing anywhere would definitely turn heads. This set of kitchen knives. It was something most top chefs could only dream of having. Chapter 92, King of Fire Control, 7-Country Unifying Noodle Dish. So these are the 7-star knives from your file. A set of 7 knives. If used flexibly, they can practically handle any ingredient in the world. Not to mention, their sharpness is astonishing. These first-class officers had all researched Yuki's information and knew about the 7-star knives. However, this was the first time they had actually seen them in person. They were all big shots in the culinary world, having handled countless knives. Naturally, they knew a thing or two about kitchen knives. Just a single glance, and their gazes were glued to the blades. Like master blacksmiths beholding a legendary, divine weapon. As Yuki moved, they also witnessed the 7-star flash severing knife dance for the first time and the terrifying sharpness of the 7-star knives. Such sharpness, I can't even imagine how such knives were forged. Watching how effortlessly Yuki cut through the ingredients, they were all now wondering just how such knives were made and where they could get similar ones. Compared to the present day, the materials used to create the 7-star knives weren't exactly high-end. The true key was in the forging techniques used by Chef Rake. Yuki suspected that perhaps Chef Rake had inadvertently used key when forging these knives, just that the key was too faint for even Rake himself to detect. Perhaps this was why the 7-star knives could carry a human soul, having absorbed Chef Rake's soul after his passing. After all, the forging of legendary cooking utensils involved the use of ki. Yuki only discovered this after mastering ki himself. Having realized this, Yuki also couldn't help but think that it was a pity Chef Rake had died so early. If only he could have lived a few more decades, maybe he really could have upgraded the 7-star knives to the level of legendary cooking utensils. Leon's final set of 7-star knives was basically on par with legendary cooking utensils, though still somewhat lacking. Actually, if Yuki wants, he could very likely replicate the method for forging the 7-star knives. He had food honor, enhanced senses, and had even mastered ki. Practically any profession was within his grasp, blacksmithing included. However, Yuki already had the 7-star knives, and Megumi and the others didn't have such specific requirements for their tools. So, he didn't bother focusing on this area. Besides, perhaps he could just fish one out someday. His main focus remained on improving his culinary skills and food honor. Those were the most important. The processing of ingredients was very easy for Yuki. Before anyone even realized it, Yuki had already finished prepping. Having completed this step, there was no further need for the 7-star knives. Yuki put them away. Then, he took out the flour. The dough kneading process naturally involved the white snake entanglement technique. With a display of finesse, Yuki processed the ingredients in a way others simply couldn't understand. Is this really not a special ability? I can't imagine any other method being able to achieve this. Looking at the dough snake coiling in mid-air, several of the first-class officers felt as if they were still dreaming. It's not a special ability, just a technique regular people can't comprehend. Even Mana Nakiri found it incredible. After all, she couldn't even begin to imagine how someone could control their body's strength and movements to achieve this. This must have been how normal chefs felt when watching them, the top chefs, cook. Normal chefs also couldn't comprehend how they were able to create such dishes. This was a situation completely beyond their own limits, beyond their current knowledge and understanding. Although they didn't really want to admit it, the facts were clear. Yuki's series of operations completely surpassed their comprehension. This time, the dough snake didn't merge back into a ball of dough but, under Yuki's control, gradually thinned. Seeing it was about right, Yuki directly released flames and, at the same time, poured the prepared oil into the fire. The flames, forming a giant pillar of fire, engulfed both the noodles and Yuki. Hiss, this intense flame. So this is Inferno, huh? I thought the stories were exaggerating. Those witnessing this for the first time were naturally shocked, speechless. They knew about Inferno, but they had always thought the stories were somewhat embellished. Seeing it in person, however, was a completely different story. Within the pillar of fire, Yuki was controlling the flames to heat the oil, while simultaneously using the white snake entanglement's subtle movements to twirl the thin noodles. The noodles now resembled springs, spiraling and twining together, with enough space left in the middle. At the same time, other ingredients were also being cooked. The noodles in mid-air were fried and fixed in shape, and the instant the frying was complete, the other ingredients Yuki had prepared were also cooked. Under this intense fire, the cooking was accelerated to an unbelievable degree. Yuki poured the cooked ingredients into the spiral noodle dish. Although the noodles were fixed in shape after frying, their texture had also changed. Yuki then placed them in a steamer basket. The flames vanished instantly, though the cooking process wasn't over yet. High-temperature steam billowed from Yuki's hands. He used the high-temperature steam to soften the noodles, making their texture even better. This scene looked exceptionally strange to the others. With a person simply placing their hands on the steamer basket and then directly releasing high-temperature steam, no matter how you looked at it, it seemed bizarre. With the dual enhancements of his evolving touch and vision, Yuki could completely achieve zero errors, constantly monitoring the condition of the noodles. Only after they had reached the optimal texture did Yuki stop releasing the steam. With a sudden exertion of force, using finesse, he launched the noodles from the steamer basket directly onto the plates he had already prepared. Yuki naturally also made portions for himself, Irina, and the others. It wasn't a formal competition, and they hadn't eaten yet, so he also made a batch for them. Just how did he do that? Headaches.
These first-class officers felt their heads were throbbing right now. They couldn't explain any of Yuki's actions.
In front of Yuki, they, the top chefs of the world, seemed like novices, only able to stare blankly at his mesmerizing performance. This was the first time they had ever experienced such a thing in their professional careers.
Please, enjoy.
My 7-country unification noodle dish, Yuki said, placing the plates before everyone.
7-country unification noodle dish. Why that name? Hearing this strange name, everyone paused. Noodle dish was noodle dish, how was this even related to history? It'll make more sense after you try it, Yuki smiled, not answering directly.
Hearing this, the others exchanged glances. No point in overthinking it, they might as well taste it first. Yuki had used so many unusual techniques.
The flavor shouldn't be bad. Strange, where are the toppings for these noodles? You took out quite a few side ingredients earlier, right? And this shape, it's rather odd. Looking at the noodles on their plates, everyone noticed something different.
Noodle dish usually had many toppings, but right now, there was nothing, just plain noodle dish. Besides that, the shape of the noodles itself was also rather peculiar. It looked thick, but upon closer inspection, it was actually very thin noodles coiled together to achieve this thickness.
How? How is this even done?
I can tell they were deep-fried, and that's the only way to keep noodles in this shape. But wanting to coil these noodles like this and have them stay coiled during deep frying, that's impossible. A first-class officer's brain short-circuited once more. Although they could tell how the noodles were made, this level of control was absurdly difficult. This level of difficulty was like having someone who had just gotten their driver's license try to fly a plane. It was like being told how something's done, having all the underlying principles explained, but actually doing it required a whole other level of skill. You all understand the principles, but actually executing it isn't something everyone can do.
You should all understand this, right? Yuki's response made everyone fall silent.
What he meant was, I've already told you how it's done, you can't do it because you lack the skills. Resigned, everyone stopped trying to pry further. He steamed it after frying to ensure the noodle's texture. And those other ingredients from earlier must be inside.
Mana Nakiri commented. Although Yuki's movements had been obscured by the flames, he wouldn't have simply ignored those ingredients. Plus, the noodle's thickness wasn't right.
Such thin noodles coiled to create such a thickness, the inside must be hollow. And the reason for creating such a hollow space was obviously to put in the other ingredients.
This wasn't hard to deduce. After speaking, Mana Nakiri also took the first bite.
She only took a small amount, after all, she wasn't sure if Yuki's cooking could truly satisfy her god's tongue. So she tried a little to test it out. While Yuki's cooking techniques during the preparation were incredibly impressive, Mana still believed she most likely wouldn't be able to keep it down. She was very familiar with her own god's tongue. However, the moment that mouthful of noodles entered her mouth, the scorching hot sauce and other ingredients, along with the broken noodles, flowed into her mouth. In that instant, a flavor like a bursting flame seared through her senses. In the face of this intense fire, even the god's tongue submitted. This fire made everyone who tasted it feel their body soften. The ultimate deliciousness, breaking through the defenses of the tongue, spread throughout the entire body.
Just one mouthful.
And everyone who tasted it involuntarily slumped onto the table, as if melting. This wasn't Yuki adding some kind of drug or anything. It was because this intense, fiery flavor was just too overwhelming. Yuki had even used ki, making the flavor of the flames permeate throughout the dish. Considering the god's tongue's drawback, Yuki had truly given it his all. This was the best dish he could currently make. And just as everyone was stunned by the powerful impact of this dish, a domineering aura, like an emperor looking down upon his kingdom, permeated their minds. The world seemed to be engulfed in flames. With a colossal figure of a flame emperor looming above, a true king of fire. Yuki's domineering culinary heart perfectly matched the dish. The result was that this group of people who ate the dish was completely stunned for half a minute. Delicious. I can finally taste something delicious again.
No more amplified flaws, no more that disgusting feeling.
Mana Nakiri looked at the dish, tears welling up in her eyes.
After all these years, she finally tasted a good meal.
Normally, she tasted dishes made by other people, but the god's tongue only amplified the flaws, not the delicious parts. Every time she tried something, it was like forcing herself to eat something disgusting.
And it didn't even work if she forced it down.
Her body would reject it, she'd just throw it back up. It could only be said that such was the price of wielding the powerful god's tongue.
However, now, Yuki's dish, after so many years, had allowed her to experience that deliciousness again. You can't eat anymore.
Everyone else was also completely shocked. But En, snapping out of it, immediately snatched the noodle dish, half-eaten by Mana Nakiri. Not that she intended to eat it herself.
It was because Mana Nakiri's stomach couldn't handle it.
For all these years, everything she ate she threw up. She was only sustained by nutrients, and her body simply couldn't handle such a large amount of food. Even this half portion might cause health problems for Mana Nakiri. So En immediately stopped her and called a doctor.
This scene also made everyone else nervous.
They all knew Mana Nakiri's health condition. As for Irina Nakiri, although she knew about her mother's condition from her grandfather, that was only secondhand. She hadn't expected just eating something could make others so nervous. Their reactions proved that Mana Nakiri's physical health was extremely poor. And this made Irina, who had been about to question her mother, instantly soften.
Chapter 93, The First Class Officer's Goodwill.
After some commotion, the doctor confirmed Mana Nakiri was fine, just that she couldn't continue eating. Otherwise, this minor situation could become very serious.
Everyone, I'm fine now. So, do you all agree now that Yuki is capable of being a temporary third-class officer? Mana Nakiri said upon seeing the doctor leave.
Yuki's culinary skills truly shocked her. To make a dish her god's tongue could actually accept, it was a miracle.
Actually, there is still one problem.
I think with his culinary skills, just having Yuki-kun be a third-class officer would be burying his talent.
Plus, that temporary label, that can go.
A first-class officer said. Yuki's cooking had stunned him completely, won him over entirely.
In his view, Yuki's dish could be considered the best in the world.
After all, in the whole world, only Yuki could make a dish Mana Nakiri could eat.
Yuki was already so strong, what about his future?
Looking at Yuki now wasn't like looking at some student, but at the future ruler of the culinary world. Someone like Yuki, with his culinary heart, was destined to stand at the very top of the culinary world.
This officer was someone who valued power and influence.
So now, his first reaction was to get on good terms with Yuki. If Yuki didn't currently lack a power base of his own, he would already be pledging his loyalty. However, Yuki was joining the WGO, so he thought they could do away with the temporary label. With Yuki's abilities, replacing Mana Nakiri as the strongest in the WGO would be incredibly easy. In fact, if Yuki wanted to, he could even become the special class officer right here and now. All he needed to do was threaten Mana Nakiri with his cooking.
For delicious food, Mana Nakiri would definitely agree to anything.
It could be said Yuki already held her life in his hands. Such a future boss, naturally, one had to be on good terms with him in advance.
The other first-class officers exchanged glances and looked at their colleague with exasperation.
Having known him for so many years, they knew his nature all too well.
So seeing their colleague practically groveling wasn't surprising.
I agree with Hughes. With Yuki-kun's abilities, it wouldn't be right to make him a third-class officer, and we can certainly drop the temporary label.
Although somewhat exasperated, they understood his reasoning, and considering Yuki's outstanding culinary skills, being on good terms with such a person was certainly beneficial. In that case, what do you all suggest? Mana Nakiri asked.
Looking at the officers, she was all too clear about their thoughts.
She didn't blame them either. After all, if she were in their shoes, she would probably do the same.
How about making Yuki a colleague, a first-class officer? I believe that's much more befitting of his skill. Hughes, the first one who spoke, immediately said. Hearing this, the others also nodded in agreement. After all, Yuki wasn't getting in through the back door. His skills were undeniable. Besides, disagreeing with this now was equivalent to offending this rising powerhouse.
They weren't stupid. Very well.
Then, Yuki, the choice is yours, third class or first class officer. A word of advice, though.
The higher the position, the more annoying it gets. Nana Nakiri offered a word of caution.
What she meant was clear: Yuki could become a first class officer, they had no objections.
But that didn't mean everyone else would agree so readily.
Those second and third class officers seeing such a young kid parachute in above them would surely stir up some trouble for him. So there would be constant challenges. In contrast, as a third class officer, although the power wasn't as great, it came with far less trouble. I'll take first class officer. Yuki's immediate reply, without any hesitation, surprised everyone.
Yuki, shouldn't you think this through first? Irina Nakiri at the side couldn't help but ask.
With Yuki making such a choice, there would be many who would challenge him in the future.
I've already made up my mind.
I'll take first class officer.
A first class officer. Besides the special class officer, that's the highest rank in the WGO, isn't it? And if that's the case, why worry about such petty squabbles?
Yuki said. It wasn't that he looked down on those who might challenge him later. These people, wanting to use their authority in the WGO against him, that simply wouldn't work. As for challenging him through Shokugekis, Yuki wasn't afraid of challenges.
In fact, his own growth needed such nourishment. Those students at Tatsuki couldn't possibly help him improve.
But here at the WGO, it was a different story. There were plenty of highly skilled chefs. As for becoming a third-class officer, that position also came with its own share of challenges. Although being a third-class officer meant fewer people would target him, a lack of authority also made solving those problems less convenient. Yuki had already built good relationships with the sole special class officer and the first class officers. If anyone wanted to target him, they wouldn't be able to use underhanded tactics, they'd have to confront him directly. And if they did, Yuki was absolutely not afraid. Hearing this, the other first-class officers exchanged glances, recognizing Yuki's confidence and that air of domineering, king-like presence. As if no obstacle could stand in his way, as if any challenge could be overcome.
Very well, then. From now on, you are a first-class officer. By the way, can you tell us more about this dish now? Nana Nakiri asked.
She was naturally very interested in this dish. After all, it was the only dish she could currently eat.
Everyone already knows the name.
This dish originated from an ancient cooking duel in Japan. The theme of that duel was National Hero, and the requirement was to make noodle dish.
Yuki explained. This left everyone even more confused.
The theme was National Hero, but how is that connected to noodles? Everyone was puzzled. The noodle dish part did fit the theme, but the National Hero part didn't make much sense. These noodles represent the history of Japan's Sengoku period.
The noodles represent Tokugawa Ieyasu.
And the other ingredients represent the other powerful clans he conquered.
Yuki explained the meaning behind the dish. I see.
Then it does fit the theme perfectly.
It really is an extraordinary dish. Yeah.
I wonder what the other dish in that duel was like. Being defeated by a dish like this, one wouldn't feel too bad about it.
Everyone was now also curious about the other dish. You're all missing one key point.
This dish, the 7-country unification noodle dish, ultimately lost that duel. However, Yuki's words nearly caused everyone's brains to short-circuit.
Lost? Lost? How is that even possible? A dish like this actually lost? They couldn't believe it.
Never mind the first-class officers, Irina, and the others, even Nana Nakiri had a look of utter shock on her face. After all, this dish, whether in its complexity, its flavor, or even its meaning, was something they could only admire.
Yuki, what was the other dish? Irina Nakiri couldn't help but ask.
She was too curious now. A dish of noodle dish taken to this level was already out of this world. Yet now Yuki was telling them there was someone even better. Irina Nakiri's question also expressed the thoughts of everyone else present. They were all incredibly curious about what kind of heaven-defying dish could possibly surpass this one. The other dish was called Ganges noodle dish, Yuki added. The Ganges noodle dish were mainly about the name's symbolism. It was more like the periodic table of elements. Ganges noodle dish, also using noodles as the theme, but the way those noodles were made was even more absurd. Every single noodle in that dish was made differently, incorporating different ingredients in each, with different kinds of cuts on them. Yet, the overall shape of each noodle remained consistent. Every mouthful of that dish had a different flavor profile. Eating just one bowl of those noodle dish was like eating countless kinds of noodle dish. After Yuki finished explaining, everyone fell silent. This other dish was also incredible. Making it meant that each noodle had to be individually prepared and kneaded, while also adding other ingredients and using unique cutting techniques for each. In terms of difficulty, it was no less than the 7-country unification noodle dish. And in terms of meaning, this concept of normal people being heroes was simply unbeatable, completely unassailable. No wonder the 7-country unification noodle dish was defeated. Being beaten by a dish like that wasn't surprising. Extraordinary. That dish is really extraordinary. Yuki, no, I should say, Officer Yuki, can you also recreate that dish? Mana Nakiri asked with some anticipation. Since Yuki could make the 7-country unification noodle dish, he should also be able to make the Ganges noodle dish. She had already found the 7-country unification noodle dish incredibly delicious, so now, she was looking forward to tasting the Ganges noodle dish that was able to defeat it. Hearing this, everyone perked up. If he truly could make this dish, how spectacular would it be? I can, but it would take some time. And I'm also a bit tired today, Yuki said with a smile. He didn't think they were being overly presumptuous. After all, if it were him, hearing about such a fantastical dish, he would also be interested in trying it himself. But he wouldn't just do as others asked. So, this was also a way of politely declining. Everyone naturally also understood the hidden meaning in Yuki's words. In that case, Officer Yuki, please go and rest first. And, you're in charge of showing Officer Yuki around. I have other matters to attend to. With that said, Mana Nakiri looked towards her daughter. This time, besides testing Yuki's culinary skills, she also intended to have a good talk with her daughter. She also knew that avoiding her constantly wasn't good. Having tasted such delicious food, her previous mindset had been completely shattered, so now was the perfect time to have a proper conversation with her daughter. Hearing this, everyone also understood what she meant. Although Hisako Arata was still very worried about Irina, she also knew this was her young lady's family matter. So, she could only follow Yuki and as they left, though very reluctantly. And quickly led Yuki to the residential area. The residences of first-class officers at the WGO headquarters were incredibly luxurious, a small villa for each. This was quite the treatment. After all, the WGO was likely even richer than the Nakiri family. The benefits and conditions were naturally also very good. Don't worry, Hisako-san. They're mother and daughter, after all, nothing bad will happen, Yuki said upon seeing Hisako Arata walking back and forth anxiously. He had read the original story and knew Mana and Irina's attitudes towards each other. Both actually cared about each other, especially Irina. Although she seemed aloof and indifferent when leaving earlier, it was just a facade, masking the turmoil within her. As for Mana Nakiri, well, she was a bit tougher than Irina, but she still cared deeply about her family. Of course, no matter what, this was Mana's fault. Although she didn't do it intentionally, she was the one who left. She couldn't just blame everything on the god's tongue. Mana and Azumi Nakiri being together had its reasons. They were quite similar. When encountering issues, their reaction was to just throw their hands up in the air, regardless of the consequences for those around them. Mana Nakiri had ignored her family and left, and Azumi was even more outrageous. Seeing his wife having such problems, he started brainwashing Irina and instilling twisted ideals in her. To call him a father was an insult to the word father.
Chapter 94, Mother and Daughter Reconcile, Azumi Nakiri's File.
That may be so, but Lady Irina and her mother haven't seen each other in so many years.
Hisako Arata was still somewhat worried. After all, Mana Nakiri had abandoned Irina and left.
In all these years, they hadn't seen each other, not even a single phone call.
With such a strained mother-daughter relationship, how could Hisako not be worried?
Just like that, about 2 hours later, Irina Nakiri returned to the villa. At this moment, Irina's eyes were red and slightly swollen. She had clearly been crying.
However, Hisako Arata breathed a sigh of relief.
Although Irina looked like she had been crying, there was a smile on her face. Her entire demeanor had changed completely from when they first arrived. The previous Irina Nakiri gave off an aloof, ice queen vibe, mixed with a hint of melancholy. This melancholy had intensified after arriving at the WGO.
Yet now, that gloominess was completely gone.
Her whole being felt much more cheerful and open.
This change was so drastic that even Hisako immediately noticed it.
Clearly, this meant that Mana Nakiri and Irina Nakiri must have reconciled. After all, the greatest source of conflict between them was the god's tongue. Although the issue wasn't fully resolved yet, Yuki had made a dish that Mana Nakiri could actually stomach.
Moreover, Mana herself had been wavering.
And Irina's worried expression when Mana was being checked by the doctor earlier was like a knife piercing Mana's heart. So, not long into the conversation, Mana was the first to break down and revealed her true feelings. Seeing her mother like this, Irina Nakiri also started crying. Years of conflict and estrangement vanished in that instant. They were family, after all. Mana didn't blame Irina, on the contrary, she felt guilty.
After the emotional release and reconciliation, they naturally also started to talk about other topics. Mother, about father. Now that her mother was more or less back to normal, what about her father?
Irina longed for a complete family. As for Azumi Nakiri's attempts to indoctrinate her with his warped philosophies, even locking her up when she resisted, Irina didn't care about those things anymore. She simply hoped her family could, like before, be together happily.
About your father. I guess it's time I told you. Take a look at this file. Mana Nakiri was initially hesitant but ultimately decided to tell her daughter.
Irina was old enough now, she had the right to know. Taking the tablet from her mother, Irina felt a knot forming in her stomach. Her mother's attitude suggested something had happened to her father. As it turned out, she was only half right. Irina had thought something had happened to Azumi Nakiri, but looking through the files, he was alive and well, even though he had been kicked out by Senzama Nakiri. However, Senzama Nakiri also knew that the initial trigger for all this was Mana herself. Mana had been the first to act. So, he let Azumi keep the Nakiri name. He didn't revert him to his original name, Azumi Nakamura. But Azumi had now completely lost it. Actually, a similar thing had happened once before. During his time at Tatsuki, Azumi had idolized Joichiro Yukihara, always chasing his shadow. Yet in the end, because of actions by other students, his idol was forced to leave Tatsuki before graduation.
At that time, this incident had a huge impact on Azumi.
His heart was incredibly fragile, like glass, easily shattered. With such a thing happening to his idol, feeling sad was perfectly normal, feeling indignant was also completely understandable. But Azumi's chosen way of dealing with it was disastrous. Although his culinary skills weren't weak, Azumi became increasingly gloomy, his personal life a mess, almost like a completely different person. Asahi Saiba was also born around that time. After which, Azumi met Mana Nakiri and fell in love with her. At that time, he was young, handsome, incredibly skilled in cooking, and also a Tatsuki graduate. So, in the end, Senzama Nakiri agreed to have him marry into the Nakiri family. Before Mana Nakiri's god's tongue developed problems, the three of them had been living very comfortably. Senzama Nakiri, seeing his daughter so happy, was also very pleased.
However, after the god's tongue incident, Mana Nakiri abandoned her family and left. Azumi Nakiri's already fragile heart was completely shattered. He then did a series of strange and problematic things, targeting his own daughter. After all this, Senzaemon Nakiri had enough and directly kicked him out of the Nakiri household. However, his last name was still retained. It was precisely because of this that others knew Azumi was only temporarily exiled. He still had a connection with the Nakiri family and could return someday. So they still interacted with him and the Nakiri family. They didn't completely abandon Azumi. This also meant that Azumi had been living quite comfortably all these years. But things changed after that. This time, unlike the incident with Joichiro Yukihira, it was much more serious, and there was no second Mana Nakiri to help him out of his depression. So, Azumi sank deeper and deeper into this darkness. His personal life, naturally, also became a complete mess. In his view, since Mana had abandoned him, then she wouldn't interfere in his matters. So he used his culinary skills and handsome appearance to do as he pleased. Irina could barely believe that this was her father. What made her almost want to facepalm was that among those first-class officers earlier, 2 had relations with Azumi Nakiri. How? How is this possible? Why would father do such things? Irina was shocked. It completely shattered her perception of her father. Because of his recent behavior, I looked into his past. I hadn't known before. I was shocked. Turns out, you have a half-brother. Mana Nakiri's expression grew more complicated as she said this. Because of Azumi's actions, Mana couldn't help but investigate his past. Thus, Azumi having a son was also discovered by Mana Nakiri. Although Azumi didn't have this son after they married, Mana couldn't bring herself to just swallow her anger and ignore it. Right now, she regretted her choice in husband. Mana Nakiri really wanted to go back in time and smack some sense into her younger self. I have a brother. The shock was simply too great, causing Irina's brain to short-circuit. Yes. Your half-brother. And he's also quite something. His past was also quite tragic. As Mana spoke, Irina Nakiri also read the files about her half-brother. She was absolutely stunned. Turns out, her brother was related to her idol, Joichiro Yukihira. And her half-brother had changed his name to Asahi Saiba, taking on Joichiro's last name. Moreover, her half-brother's experience had been far more tragic than her own. Although successfully born thanks to his mother's efforts, because no one knew who his father was, his mother later regretted giving birth to him, resorting to drinking to cope. Whenever anything happened, she would take it out on Asahi Saiba, constantly scolding and beating him. He had never experienced any maternal affection. After his mother's death, Asahi Saiba went to an orphanage and encountered Joichiro Yukihira. Because Joichiro Yukihira's cooking had that heartwarming quality, and because of Joichiro's easygoing nature, Asahi Saiba directly saw Joichiro as his father figure and changed his surname to Saiba. Now, Asahi Saiba had already made a name for himself among midnight chefs. A special ability that replicates others cooking through their knives. And a midnight chef. Irina exclaimed in surprise after reading this. Yes. His ability is very powerful. And it was precisely because of this ability that he chose to become a midnight chef. This way, stealing others' knives was much easier. Mana Nakiri was very clear why Asahi Saiba chose to become a midnight chef. After all, as a midnight chef, he could do things almost unscrupulously. This way, stealing knives naturally became much easier. If he were a normal chef, wanting to steal another's knives, he would still need to bet against them. If they refused, there was nothing he could do. Then mother, what do you think we should do? Irina asked, referring to both Azumi Nakiri and Asahi Saiba. About your father, after reading all this, some actions simply shouldn't be forgiven. Of course, I'll still ask him one last time and see what he has to say, Mana said, her intent clear. She wasn't ready to forgive Azumi's actions. But this matter was, in a way, caused by her actions as well. So, she wanted to give Azumi one last chance. If Azumi's answer satisfied her, then, although their marriage was done, he would keep the Nakiri name. He'd still be Irina Nakiri's father. But if this guy was still irredeemable, then Mana wouldn't leave Azumi anything at all. Hearing this, Irina didn't say anything.
If it were the previous time Azumi messed up and had a child, Asahi, before meeting Mananakiri, there was nothing more to say.
But all his subsequent actions, even Irina Nakiri couldn't easily forgive this father. Although Mana had left, she hadn't caused any chaos or done anything wrong.
Conversely, after leaving, Azumi had completely let himself go.
As for your half-brother, Irina, this decision is for you to make. He and I are not blood-related, but you are his sister. So, it's up to you to decide on his matter. Mananakiri left Asahi Saiba's matter in Irina's hands. You don't need to give me an answer now. Think about it carefully and then let me know.
This isn't a decision to take lightly, Mananakiri said sternly. Hearing this, Irina Nakiri, who was about to answer directly, held back. She would think it over later. After they finished talking, Irina returned to the residential villa. And thus unfolded the scene Yuki and Hisako Arado had seen earlier.
Yuki-kun, thank you so much. After entering, Irina walked up to Yuki and bowed deeply.
She knew that the reconciliation with her mother had only been possible thanks to Yuki. If not for him, she really didn't know how long she would have had to wait to see her mother again. As for her father, well, there was nothing to be done there. She no longer expected Azumi Nakiri's return to the family. After all the things he had done, his chaotic personal life, Irina knew very well that some lines just couldn't be crossed. Clearly, Azumi Nakiri had obliterated every last one.
This also made Irina's view of him change drastically.
Even after being treated so badly during her childhood, Irina Nakiri had still chosen to forgive him.
But this time, it really was too much.
No need for thanks, Irina-san.
The god's tongue problem hasn't been completely solved yet.
Although I did make a dish your mother could eat, the fundamental problem remains.
She can't have me be her personal chef, right?
Yuki said that it was about time to seriously tackle the god's tongue issue. Now that he had ki, perhaps using ki could change her sense of taste.
As long as the god's tongue's tendency to amplify flaws was addressed, the problem would essentially be fixed. No matter what, I being able to reconcile with my mother, it's thanks to you. Irina shook her head.
Regardless of everything else, her mother being more or less back to normal, that was the most important thing.
Although Mananakiri couldn't return home yet, at least their relationship had improved.
This was already very good for Irina Nakiri.
After some discussion, everyone went to their respective rooms.
At the same time, the news of Yuki becoming a first-class officer spread throughout the WGO like wildfire. Hearing this news, everyone was practically dumbfounded. A first-class officer. This position, and the person who got it was a kid who was still in school. If it weren't for the well-established status of WGO, they would have suspected foul play. Who had ever seen someone this young becoming a first-class officer? Among them, the second-class and third-class officers were the most suspicious. But with the first-class officers and the special-class officer Mananakiri all standing up to vouch for Yuki, those with doubts could only accept the reality. After all, who could question such authority? Chapter 95, The WGO's Duties, Azumi Nakiri's Invitation. Early the next morning, someone came looking for Yuki. A second-class officer who had also appeared in the original story. She was the one who had assessed Soma Yukihira and the others before. Her name was Lanterby. While portrayed as a bit of a tsundere in the original story, in front of Yuki, she wouldn't act like that. Yuki was now a first-class officer, much higher in rank than her. Although she was a bit doubtful about Yuki's capabilities being truly on par with a first-class officer, with the higher-ups' endorsement, she couldn't really question it openly. Her purpose for being here was very simple. She had received an assignment from END to explain the WGO officer's job responsibilities to Yuki. The responsibilities of an officer aren't very complicated. Firstly, assessment. Some top restaurants and hotels, their ratings need to be verified by officers. As for the standards, I'll send them over later. Second, examining. However, since you're a first-class officer, you are responsible for assessing first-class chefs.
The number of first-class chefs is small, so this part of the job isn't very demanding. As for the third part, this one is a bit special. It involves dealing with midnight chefs. Lanterby explained the main responsibilities of officers. The first two didn't interest Yuki much, but upon hearing the last one, Yuki perked up. What does dealing with midnight chefs mean? Yuki asked, curious. You all know what kind of people midnight chefs are. They're completely reckless and unscrupulous, and when some organizations are threatened by them, they'll seek help from the WGO. Usually, after receiving such requests, officers are sent to deal with the situation. Lanterby explained. Regarding those midnight chefs, the WGO also found them to be quite troublesome. This last type of task actually also had some risks involved. After all, those midnight chefs would do anything. Using illegal ingredients in their cooking was common, they would even use deadly weapons. If I can't beat you in the kitchen, then we'll settle it outside. Moreover, the higher the officer's rank, the higher the rank of the midnight chefs they would encounter. For midnight chefs who could reach such a high level, there were always significant powers behind them, making their behavior even more dangerous. In short, dealing with these guys was a huge pain. Besides needing to outperform them in cooking, one also had to be extra careful in other aspects. Not all midnight chefs were like Asahi Saiba's group. Asahi Saiba's team was considered among the more principled ones in the midnight chef community. That's rather interesting. Hisako, take note. Please keep an eye out for this kind of assignment. Yuki, however, was very interested in it and gave Hisako Arato a reminder. As for Irina Nakiri, although nominally also his secretary, such tasks were clearly not something Irina would do. It was best to leave them to Hisako Arato. Hearing this, Hisako quickly noted these things down. Her competence was without a doubt, but her actions also surprised Lanterby somewhat. Hello? Did you even listen to what I just said? I said those midnight chefs are dangerous. We lost a second-class officer just last month because of them. Lanterby was somewhat puzzled. She felt that what she said shouldn't be that difficult to understand. After hearing it, not only wasn't Yuki afraid, but he even wanted to prioritize these tasks. It truly made her unable to comprehend. I heard you. But I'm not particularly worried about the danger. Yuki stated. Honestly, speaking of danger. In this world, probably no one was more dangerous than he was. In terms of personal combat, Yuki was invincible. As for firearms, unless it was a missile directly aimed at him, normal firearms were useless against him. With food honor, Yuki could easily dodge bullets. As for long-range sniping, he could also sense danger beforehand. Once he sensed it, wanting to hit him was practically impossible. Moreover, Yuki also had his freezing air special ability, able to create ice around his body. While not yet strong enough to completely block high-powered weapons, blocking normal bullets wasn't a problem. Although he couldn't block powerful armor-piercing rounds, his ice could still slow them down significantly, giving him enough time to dodge. In short, what others considered dangerous tasks were a walk in the park for Yuki. If those midnight chefs played by the rules, then he would defeat them in the kitchen. If they were to try something shady, then he wouldn't mind sending them on a one-way trip to the grave. Whatever. If you get into trouble later, don't blame me for not warning you. Anyway, that's it for the work explanation. Also, there aren't any mandatory requirements for first-class officers. You have considerable freedom, unless it's an order from Mana Nakiri-sama herself. Once she gives an order, even a first-class officer can't refuse the assigned work. After explaining these points, Lanterby left. She felt that Yuki's brain might be a bit off. Who would actively seek out the most dangerous tasks? Yuki, are you sure about this? Ms. Lanterby said these tasks are very dangerous. Hisako Arato couldn't help but ask. Don't worry, since I'm taking these tasks, it means I know what I'm doing. Don't forget, I also have the Inferno special ability. You two just don't follow me when I'm doing these. Also, Hisako-san, send out a message for me. Tell everyone I accept challenges from any second-class officer. Yuki stated. Both second-class and first-class officers could become his nutrients, however, the first-class officers had already seen his skills, so they wouldn't bother. Of course, if he went looking for them to compete, it wouldn't be a problem. Those first-class officers would probably also be very willing to do this favor for Yuki. There were bound to be many second-class officers who wouldn't accept him readily, so giving them a chance to challenge him would be great. These people would become Yuki's stepping stones. As for third-class officers, their skills couldn't benefit Yuki in any meaningful way. They were like students at school, there was no need to give them a chance. As for whether they'd feel annoyed by this, it wasn't something Yuki cared about. Those guys could only seethe in silence. Hearing this, Hisako didn't hesitate. After all, in her view, Yuki had already conquered both first-class and special-class officers. Those second-class officers couldn't possibly pose a threat to Yuki. So, following Hisako Arato's actions, many challenges quickly flooded Yuki's WGO internal mailbox, all from those second-class officers who weren't thrilled about his appointment. In their eyes, this was just some greenhorn kid who got in through connections. Although his background was strong, many of them at this level still had their pride, so there were quite a few who challenged Yuki. Yuki accepted them all. As long as they were second-class officers, he agreed directly. Of course, mixed among them were a few who tried to muddy the waters, and Yuki naturally wouldn't give those people a chance. He had Hisako send a group reply to those people. The content was very simple: if you have eye problems, get yourself checked. Otherwise, becoming blind someday won't be good. This one move enraged the third-class officers, but they had no means of actually dealing with Yuki. As for ganging up and beating him up, they wouldn't dare. The reason was very simple: WGO was monitored everywhere. There were practically no blind spots unless they cornered Yuki in the bathroom, but leaving the bathroom would still place them under surveillance. So they could only fantasize about jumping Yuki. That very day, Yuki competed with a second-class officer. Since the Shokyuchi system was something famous only within Japan, outside of Japan, no such system really existed. And there was also no Shokyuchi Administration Bureau, so Yuki directly dumped all arrangements onto the challenger. Since you're the one challenging me, not the other way around, it makes sense for you to prepare everything, right? The challenger could only accept this. After all, they were the ones challenging Yuki. If they couldn't even manage the judges and the venue, Yuki couldn't possibly compete with them, right? So all the work was their responsibility. Yuki was only responsible for having the match. Second-class officers, in front of Yuki, were basically free wins. However, their culinary skills were still quite good and did give Yuki some inspiration. As Yuki continuously won, these officers finally realized Yuki didn't become a first-class officer because of connections, but because he genuinely had the skills. Crushing second-class officers like this already spoke volumes. After just a few days, over a dozen second-class officers had been defeated by Yuki. With such a win rate, even if others were dense, they could also see that Yuki's culinary skills were truly terrifying. During this time, Yuki was also keeping an eye out for midnight chef assignments, but so far, no suitable targets had appeared. There had indeed been some midnight chef incidents, but all were minor matters. Finding midnight chefs at the second-class or first-class level was proving to be rather difficult. 13 consecutive wins. Yuki-kun is just too strong. Hisako Arato said with emotion as they returned to the villa after yet another victory. Yuki's culinary skills were truly terrifying. And he could achieve 0 errors every single time, something practically impossible for other chefs. I'm pretty sure I've taken care of most of them. There shouldn't be many left. After dealing with these second-class officers, I'll go visit those first-class officers, Yuki said. Hearing this, Hisako Arato quickly checked her records. Just as Yuki said, there were 5 second-class officers remaining. Actually, the WGO naturally couldn't have only a dozen or so second-class officers. It was mainly because these were the ones who challenged Yuki from the beginning. The others were taking a wait-and-see approach. Seeing Yuki's winning streak, they knew that challenging Yuki wasn't a wise move.
So, no one else dared to challenge Yuki afterward. Just as Yuki finished speaking, his phone suddenly rang.
Taking it out, it was an unknown number. After Yuki answered the phone,
a somewhat gloomy voice came from the other end.
"Hello, is this Officer Yuki?"
The voice on the other end sounded very polite.
"Yes, this is Yuki. May I ask who's calling? What is the matter?" Yuki asked with some confusion. "Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Azumi Nakiri. Officer Yuki, I wonder if you have time to meet?"
The other party quickly introduced himself.
Hearing this name, Yuki was taken aback. He never expected that the person calling would actually be Irina Nakiri's father, Azumi Nakiri. Azumi Nakiri? You should be Irina Nakiri's father, right? Just say it, why are you calling? Yuki didn't plan to meet Azumi Nakiri. There was simply no need.
He didn't have the slightest bit of good feeling towards this guy. And in his opinion, in the original story, while Azumi Nakiri seemed to cause a lot of trouble at Tatsuki, thinking about it carefully, it was all pointless. In the original story, Azumi fooled a few Elite 10 members who hadn't yet entered society, making them jointly sign to replace the director. While it seemed like an impressive move, whether it was the Elite 10 or him, they were all idiots.
Those Elite 10 didn't think at all. The Elite 10's authority was granted by Tatsuki. But where did Tatsuki's authority come from? It was all due to the Nakiri family, okay? And they would graduate.
Once they graduated, everyone would know they were traitors.
At that time, who would use them?
Their only option was to leave Japan and develop somewhere else. So, being a traitor, their futures were practically bleak. As for Azumi, it was Senzaman Nakiri willingly playing along with him, using him as a whetstone.
Otherwise, Senzaman had 10,000 ways to directly finish off Azumi.
Whether it was his plans collapsing or directly disappearing off the face of the earth. It might have seemed like he used the rules and grasped the initiative, but ultimately, he was only a clown performing under someone else's watch. Hearing Yuki's words, Azumi Nakiri's face also turned a bit gloomy. Keep in mind, he was doing quite well now and had some connections with 2 first-class officers. Usually, others would also give him this face, but now, Yuki didn't give him any face at all. However, he also knew that now wasn't the time to turn hostile. Although he was somewhat annoyed, he still maintained his composure and spoke with Yuki normally.
"In that case, let's just talk over the phone. I would like to ask Officer Yuki to do something for me at Tatsuki."
With that, Azumi began to describe a grand vision, basically saying that after he secured the director position, he would promise Yuki many benefits.
As for why he found Yuki, it was also because of Yuki's relationships with Teranori Kuga and Satoshi Ishiki. It could be said that Yuki's influence at Tatsuki was something he couldn't compare to. As long as Yuki was willing to help, then his plan of returning to Tatsuki and seizing the director position would be secured. Chapter 96, Yuki, I'm allergic to idiots, Irina Nakiri's realization. Azumi Nakiri, I've heard of you. You were from Polar Star back in the day.
Although Uncle Dojima and Joichiro Yukihira were the brightest stars of the Golden Age, your name wasn't small either. However, I didn't expect your culinary skills came at the cost of your brain.
I, for one, am allergic to idiots.
So, do me a favor and don't call me again.
I'm worried your stupidity might be contagious.
After Yuki slammed the phone on the other end, he directly hung up and blacklisted Azumi Nakiri's number.
He really was allergic to idiots and didn't want to say anything more to him.
On the other side, looking at the disconnected call, Azumi's expression stiffened. He didn't understand why Yuki would insult him.
Logically, even if Yuki didn't agree with his plan, he shouldn't have said such harsh words, right?
And he thought his plan was pretty good too. He had already fooled several Elite 10 members. He contacted Yuki this time because he got the news from those 2 first-class officers, plus he learned about Yuki's status at Tatsuki from Eishi Tsukasa. That's why he contacted Yuki. But he never expected to be dissed by Yuki like this. Of course, there was also anger. After all, being insulted by someone, it would be strange not to be angry. But when he wanted to call back and question him, he found his number had already been blacklisted.
This made Azumi's face instantly turn as black as coal. Damn you!
Just wait until I become Tatsuki's director, then I'll deal with you slowly.
Azumi Nakiri was also helpless.
After all, Yuki was a first-class officer, he simply had no way to retaliate against Yuki. Acting rashly would only get him played to death by Yuki. So, he could only choose to target Yuki after becoming Tatsuki's director. At that time, although Yuki would also be a first-class officer, that status wouldn't change, he would also be a student of Tatsuki. Even if Yuki chose to just pack up and leave when faced with his targeting, at least he could annoy Yuki, which would count as revenge. So now, he could only choose to bide his time and start with other Elite 10 members.
Why Yuki-kun, that call just now?
At this moment, Irina Nakiri's pupils dilated. Although she hadn't heard the voice on the other end of the phone, Yuki's insult had already revealed the other party's identity. It was her father, her greatest shadow, Azumi Nakiri.
That's right. It was your father, Azumi Nakiri.
That guy contacted me wanting me to help him stir up trouble, so I gave him a piece of my mind. Also, Irina, don't be scared by him.
I've heard about your past. That guy doesn't deserve to be a father.
And with what he's doing now, I think this father of yours is about to be finished.
Yuki shook his head. What do you mean by that?
Yuki's words directly pulled Irina out of her fear. After all, Yuki said Azumi was about to be finished. This made Irina momentarily forget her fear.
It's simple.
His purpose in calling me just now was to ask me to help him persuade several Elite 10 members, to get more than half of the Elite 10 to replace the director with him. You yourself are an Elite 10 member, you should be very clear about his purpose, right? Yuki revealed the purpose of Azumi's call. As soon as these words were out, both Irina's and Hisako Arato's pupils constricted. According to the Elite 10's authority, as long as more than half of the Elite 10 agree, then the director can be replaced. And he is also a member of the Nakiri family.
If he really succeeds, he indeed can take over Tatsuki. But why did Yuki-sama say he's finished? Hisako Arato's address for Yuki had now also become honorific.
This was something she called him from the heart after spending this period with Yuki.
One reason was that Yuki's status and position indeed deserved such an address.
Another reason was that Yuki's culinary skills had indeed conquered both of them, so Hisako now respected Yuki very much. Of course, the most crucial point was still because Yuki's existence was causing Irina's mentality to continuously develop in a good direction. This was what Hisako was most grateful to Yuki for. At this moment, Hisako asked this question to help her young lady. Because hearing Azumi intended to use the Elite 10's authority to enter Tatsuki, Irina's body had started to tremble. Although the Elite 10 have the authority to replace the director, since this authority appeared until now, have you ever seen any cohort of students use this power?
Yuki asked in return.
Hearing this, the two exchanged glances.
They understood Tatsuki very well. But thinking about it carefully, it seemed to be true.
Since this authority appeared, the director had never been replaced by the Elite 10. This authority of the Elite 10 has more symbolic meaning than practical meaning. Tatsuki gave this authority to highlight the importance of the Elite 10. But anyone with a normal brain wouldn't want to use this power. Because whoever uses it basically sentences their own future to death. As soon as Yuki's words came out, the two were even more puzzled.
Why does whoever uses it sentence their own future to death? The two really couldn't understand. Did this authority carry such a huge risk? The reason is simple.
The person serving as director will only be a member of the Nakiri family, and it has always been the head of the Nakiri family, the person with the most power in the Nakiri family. The Elite 10 can replace the director, but why did Tatsuki become such a famous school? Why do Tatsuki students have such high value after graduation? This is all because the Nakiri family is supporting it from behind. It was the Nakiri family that founded Tatsuki, that made Tatsuki what it is. Tatsuki, in the end, is just an affiliate of the Nakiri family. Tatsuki's land, resources, and everything else were all procured by the Nakiri family.
Once the Nakiri family's support is gone, then Tatsuki will become a thing of the past overnight.
By the same token, the Elite Ten's power is also granted by the Nakiri family. Their ability to rapidly grow relying on Tatsuki's resources, this is all because the Nakiri family is willing to give it to them. Once they betray and replace the director, then it means challenging you all. How would you deal with such traitors? After Yuki said all this, the two finally understood. Indeed, because they had always been studying at Tatsuki, they had overlooked this point. Even if one was an Elite 10 member, once they challenged the Nakiri family, it would be difficult to move even an inch in Japan in the future unless the other party could reach the heights of Jin Dojima, Joichiro Yukihira, or even Yuki. Only then could they make a name for themselves. As for Azumi Nakiri, the same principle applies. Even if he becomes director, once the Nakiri family withdraws its resources, what will he use to maintain Tatsuki's operations? The reason I said I'm allergic to idiots just now is precisely this. And this guy, it's a wonder he's been in society for so long yet still can't understand such a simple truth. Yuki shook his head. Azumi's behavior could be described as purely brain-dead. So that's how it is. Irina Nakiri finally stopped trembling after hearing this. Although still somewhat fearful, this fear had lessened considerably. You don't need to be afraid of him. Although he is indeed your father, ask yourself, what should a father be like? I've also heard about your past, he doesn't deserve to be a father. Next time you see him, he won't do anything to you. If he even dares to lay a hand on you, believe it or not, the next day he'll absolutely disappear from the face of the earth. Yuki said, somewhat amused. Given Azumi's series of actions, if not for Mana Nakiri and for the sake of breaking Irina's psychological shadow, Senzaman Nakiri would probably have made Azumi disappear long ago. After all, the god's tongue problem was already giving him a headache. For Azumi to come and add insult to injury at this time, did he really think Senzaman was some kind of kind-hearted saint? The Nakiri family being able to develop to this scale wasn't just by relying on these superficial things. Isn't that a bit too exaggerated? Hearing Yuki's words, Hisako Arado also sucked in a sharp breath. How did it turn into disappear from the face of the earth just like that? It's not exaggerated at all. You two still know too little about this world. In short, remember one thing, this guy isn't worthy of your fear. Remember, Irina, you have a huge backing. You are no longer that little girl of just a few years old. If he appears before you, even if you slap him, he won't do anything. Yuki looked down on Azumi Nakiri. He had played a good hand so badly. Although Mana had left back then, if he hadn't messed around, his life could have been very good. But this guy personally ruined his own future. The reason he could still bounce around outside now was also because he still had the Nakiri surname. Otherwise, once he lost the Nakiri surname, it meant he was completely abandoned by the Nakiri family. Other factions weren't blind. The reason those factions that were friendly with him now were still friendly was also because they were taking a gamble. As long as the surname was still there, there was a chance to return. Once he returned, the Nakiri family was secondary, the truly crucial point was Mana Nakiri. Azumi, as Mana's husband, although he married into the family and gave the impression of a pretty boy living off a woman, such a relationship was also very useful. Once this relationship was gone, then these factions would instantly abandon Azumi. Although I know Yuki is saying this for my own good, I wouldn't go so far as to directly slap him. Irina Nakiri was also left speechless by Yuki at this moment. After Yuki said this, she thought about it carefully and realized it was true. Besides Azumi being her father, which naturally created a sense of oppression, there really was nothing else about him that she needed to fear. And now there was another point, both she and Mana were very disappointed with Azumi's actions over the years. She had already determined that Azumi and Mana couldn't get back together. She was also very unhappy with this father's operations over the years. There was originally one more chance, but Azumi now wanted to seize Tatsuki's director position. Regardless of whether he succeeded or not, since he intended to do so, then that last chance no longer needed to be reserved for him. At this moment, Irina's last bit of hope had also vanished. She knew very well that even if she was still ready to give Azumi a chance, her grandfather and mother would not allow Azumi to return. And she was now also completely disappointed in Azumi. Her fear of Azumi stemmed from his identity as her father. But now, after being completely disappointed, she no longer considered him her father. Without this layer of identity, there was nothing left about Azumi for Irina to fear. Her fear completely vanished. At this moment, Irina completely relaxed her mind. Regarding cooking, she had already figured things out. This was Yuki's contribution. Now her mother had also returned to normal and reconciled with her. This was also Yuki's contribution. Her fear of her father had also completely disappeared. This was still Yuki's contribution. If Yuki had a favorability system, then the system's notification sound should probably be appearing now, because Irina's favorability towards him was basically completely full. To be able to say such things proves you are no longer afraid. This is a good thing. This is your own family matter, I won't get involved. After speaking, Yuki left. As for Irina and Hisako, he knew very well that these two still had things to do. Let's go, Hisako. There are still other things to do next. Watching Yuki leave, Irina Nakiri spoke. Oh okay, Lady Irina. But what are we going to do now? Hisako Arado asked with some confusion. She didn't know what they were going to do next. Go find my mother. Although it wouldn't be a big deal even if he succeeded in this matter, this farce will still affect the Nakiri family. We can't let that guy mess around. Also, Hisako, contact the school. After we go back, we'll move to Polar Star. Irina Nakiri said. Hearing this, Hisako was taken aback for a moment, but she quickly understood her young lady's thoughts. Clearly, this was aimed at Yuki. Although from the information they had, Yuki already had a childhood sweetheart, and Alice Nakiri was also pursuing Yuki now. But she didn't think her young lady would lose in this aspect. So, for her young lady's happiness, she was also full of fighting spirit. Chapter 97, a plan that ended before it began, the baffled Elite 10. After speaking, Hisako Arado began to contact the school. As for Irina Nakiri, she went to find Mana Nakiri. Irina, what brings you here at this time? Mana asked, somewhat surprised to see her daughter at this hour. Since they had just reconciled, Irina usually came to find Mana after dinner, and her stays weren't long because Mana's body couldn't take it. Her body was already weak, and she had some work to deal with, so there wasn't much time left for them to bond. I came because there's something I want to discuss with you, mother. Just now. Irina told Mana about Azumi calling Yuki, his series of plans, and finally being slammed by Yuki. After hearing all this, Mana was silent for a moment. Yuki insulting him was not wrong. That guy is really living backwards. After being out in the world for so many years, he still can't understand this simple truth. Mana Nakiri couldn't help but rub her temples. If Azumi had even a little bit of a brain, it would be impossible for him to play such an outrageous move. She felt Yuki's evaluation of Azumi was even somewhat conservative. So, Irina, what are your thoughts? Mana Nakiri shook her head and then looked at her daughter. At this moment, she was somewhat surprised because previously when Azumi was mentioned, Irina would instinctively feel some fear. Mana was very angry at that time. After all, she knew about Azumi's past actions. What normal father would make his own daughter feel fear just by mentioning his name? But now, fear could no longer be seen in her daughter's eyes. Irina had completely walked out of this shadow. Almost without thinking, Mana knew that this matter was probably related to Yuki. At this moment, she felt that she owed Yuki a rather large favor. Her God's tongue, her daughter's mentality, the relationship between her and her daughter, all were helped by Yuki. I don't intend to acknowledge him as my father anymore. Tell Grandpa to strip him of his surname. Irina Nakiri stated her thoughts. I understand. Irina, you've really grown up. We will handle this matter. Mana Nakiri smiled. At this moment, Irina made her feel a sense of maturity. She was no longer that little girl from before. Don't look at how Irina appeared as a very mature ice queen in the eyes of the outside world before. To put it bluntly, she was still just a little girl. But now it was different, she had truly become mature. After Irina left, Mana Nakiri directly called her father. She had originally intended to give Azumi a chance. Besides a little guilt of her own, the most crucial point was Irina. After all, Azumi was still Irina's father. But now, this daughter didn't even acknowledge Azumi anymore. Plus, learning about Azumi's entire plan, Mana's last bit of guilt vanished. So, at this time, it was natural to take action against Azumi. They didn't intend to let Azumi continue acting like a buffoon. Although striking Azumi down at his highest point would be the biggest blow to him, the Nakiri family didn't need to spend so much effort on this clown. Just taking away his surname was enough. Once his surname was taken away, it would be impossible for Azumi to make a name for himself in the culinary world. He could only honestly find a small place to open a small shop. Surviving wouldn't be a problem. Mana Nakiri didn't intend to truly drive Azumi to his death, she still left him a little way out. Senzaemon Nakiri, at Tatsuki, had been living quite comfortably recently. Although the god's tongue problem hadn't been completely solved, with Yuki around, at least Irina and Mana had reconciled. And the probability of solving the god's tongue's drawback in the future was very high. As the saying goes, joyful events bring a cheerful spirit. He was exactly like this now. However, after receiving his daughter's call and learning the ins and outs of the matter, Senzaemon was speechless. He had been happy for a few days, and then this Azumi guy popped up again to cause him trouble. At this moment, his mood was quite bad. Fortunately, after hearing Irina had overcome her inner fear, he also felt relieved. Originally, one of the purposes of keeping Azumi around was to help Irina eliminate her psychological shadow. But now, it seemed Azumi was no longer needed. Neither Mana nor Irina held any hope for Azumi anymore. He, who had always disliked Azumi, could finally take action. You finally figured it out. That bastard is no good. I only didn't touch him before out of consideration for you two. Now he actually wants to meddle with Tatsuki. Senzaemon Nakiri's tone was filled with disdain. In his eyes, Azumi's plan was something only children who hadn't entered society would play. After all, this plan, never mind being full of loopholes, was completely meaningless. It might seem like you've made a good move, but you've overlooked that the opponent is someone who can flip the chessboard at any time. He is beyond saving. The Elite 10 at Tatsuki also needs to be punished. If they mess around, it will ultimately affect Tatsuki somewhat. Mana Nakiri said. If the Elite 10 messed around, it would definitely damage Tatsuki's reputation. Just like this incident, although the consequences wouldn't be very severe and the Nakiri family could easily handle it. But they also couldn't just let these guys mess around when they knew about it. Their time and energy were very precious. They didn't have time to play house with these students. I will handle the matter of the Elite 10. Hearing this, Senzaemon Nakiri nodded. The Elite 10 itself was for training management talent for the Nakiri family's enterprises. He didn't demand that these people must stay and work for the Nakiri family's affiliated powers after graduation, but at least you couldn't be a traitor. Now these Elite 10 members, before even graduating, were starting to act as traitors. They needed to be dealt with. After hanging up the phone, Senzaemon Nakiri had someone notify the Elite 10 members at school to hold a meeting. The director is calling us for a meeting? This is quite rare. After learning this news, the Elite 10 members were all very surprised. Even for many school activities, Senzaemon would only briefly understand their work and then not ask any more questions. Such an incident of directly convening the Elite 10 for a meeting rarely happened. However, they knew very well that the director's orders couldn't be disobeyed. Although some of them were planning to replace their director, before he was replaced, the director was still the director. His orders still had to be obeyed. In less than an hour, the Elite 10 members had already gathered in the meeting room. Since everyone is here, then I won't waste words. Recently, I received some news. It seems some among you are planning to use the Elite 10's authority to replace me. Senzaemon Nakiri's voice wasn't loud, but as soon as these words were spoken, for the Elite 10, it was like a deafening thunderclap. The several Elite 10 members who had already agreed to Azumi were the most panicked at this moment. Although they didn't know how Senzaman found out, since he had now convened them here to discuss this matter, it meant their act of being traitors was also known to their director.
Hey! No way! Someone really plans to use that authority? Taranori Kuga asked, somewhat baffled. He truly knew nothing. Because Azumi hadn't contacted him yet. Knowing he and Ishiki both had relations with Yuki, Azumi had contacted Yuki first. This led to Kuga and Ishiki still knowing nothing. In the original story, Azumi Nakiri received help from 6 people: Eishi Tsukasa, Rindo Kobayashi, Momo Akakubo, Sumai Saito, Nene Kinokuni, and Itsuya Aizen. The remaining 4 were Tosuke Megashima, Taranori Kuga, Satoshi Ishiki, and Irina Nakiri. So, it seems some people have had ideas they shouldn't have. Satoshi Ishiki also noticed. To replace the director, more than half of the people needed to agree. Irina Nakiri couldn't possibly participate. As for Kuga, based on his understanding of Kuga, Kuga couldn't possibly be acting. Plus himself, a total of 3 people could be excluded. That is to say, the others might all be traitors. At this moment, Ishiki also didn't know what to say. He was somewhat curious about who exactly had orchestrated this. I gathered you here not to assign blame, but just to tell some of you present that your plan has already failed. Azumi Nakiri has been expelled from the Nakiri family. And I will strip him of the Nakiri surname. From now on, this person will not exist in the Nakiri family. You Elite 10 members, since you are in management, your thinking should be more mature. This kind of game that only children would play should have been discarded long ago. Especially you, Aizen. Wanting to build a business empire isn't that easy. You all should think it over carefully. Those who figure it out can act as if nothing happened. Those who can't figure it out, just step down yourselves. This position is not suitable for you. Senzaman Nakiri didn't say it directly. It wasn't that he wanted to be a riddle maker, but some words didn't need to be brought out into the open. If they couldn't even understand this simple truth, then there was no need for them to continue in their roles in the future. In society, those people would either be devoured until not even bones were left, or they would live a mediocre life. Either way, neither was worthy of his excessive attention. Senzaman Nakiri specifically mentioned Itsuya Aizen not because he was disappointed with him. On the contrary, among these people, he favored Aizen the most. There were countless chefs with strong culinary skills, but not so many with strong management abilities. Aizen was someone he thought highly of. Although his ambition was exposed after becoming an Elite 10 member, Aizen's abilities were indeed undeniable. Specially reminding him was to tell Aizen not to be so naive, otherwise, never mind a business empire, even setting up a commercial street could easily be brought down by others. So, Aizen, you were also involved? The director specifically singled you out. After Senzaman Nakiri left, Taranori Kuga looked at Itsuya Aizen. After all, he was the only one singled out by name. The others looked at Aizen. The several traitors who planned to rebel were also the same. They didn't understand why Senzaman would specifically mention Aizen. Keep in mind, among them, the one with the strongest culinary skills was Eishi Tsukasa, and Tsukasa also had a special ability. He was also a traitor, but he wasn't singled out. As for whether Senzaman didn't know Tsukasa was a traitor, Tsukasa certainly didn't believe that. He had actually contacted Azumi, and was also the one who contacted him most. After all, Tsukasa was responsible for lobbying the other Elite 10 members. Under such circumstances, since Senzaman knew Azumi was the mastermind, wanting to find out about him would be almost too easy. How? Alright, I think I understand. I really did do something stupid. Aizen, who was already somewhat annoyed by being singled out, flared up even more when Kuga asked him like this. But he quickly realized the problem. Itsuya Aizen wasn't a fool. Now that he was singled out, it instead made him a bit clearer, and he began to think about why he was singled out. This kind of problem Aizen could actually figure it out very easily. It was just that he was too focused on quickly completing his business empire that he was led by Azumi's grand promises. The place where Aizen fell into the trap was his ambition. Only with sufficiently large desires would one be easily tempted. Conversely, those who didn't care about anything were the ones who were difficult to approach. At this moment, he recalled Senzaman's actions just now, one sentence, directly stripping Azumi of his surname. Even if they all now agreed for Azumi to become director, it was useless. What originally seemed like a very good plan was broken by the other party with just one sentence. What did this mean? It meant you could only continue to play if the other party was ready to play with you. If they didn't want to play with you, you simply couldn't move an inch. These Elite 10 members were the same. Having figured this out, Aizen couldn't help but curse himself internally. No wonder Senzaman would say such things. In his eyes, wasn't this just child's play? Chapter 98, Nakiri Family's Decision. Azumi Nakamura has nothing left. Senzaman and Nakiri had practically slapped the answer on their faces. Anyone involved in this matter, with a little attention, could figure it out. After Itsuya Aizen understood, he also knew why Senzaman hadn't spelled it out clearly. If this simple truth needed to be spelled out, it meant they weren't suitable for management, and they shouldn't occupy those positions. Quick on the uptake, aren't you, Aizen? No wonder the directors singled you out. Rindo Kobayashi said, somewhat amused. Listening to your tone, you knew from the beginning, didn't you? Hearing Rindo's words, Aizen was taken aback for a moment, looking at her with some surprise. This guy has helped me out so much, after all. It wouldn't be good to just let him get screwed over by someone. If he's gone, then no one will be eager to do my work for me in the future. Rindo Kobayashi waved her hand dismissively. In the original story, Rindo never had a good feeling about Azumi Nakiri from the start. She knew very well that Azumi's plan wouldn't succeed. But Eishi Tsukasa, that idiot, was completely led astray. To prevent Tsukasa from playing himself to death, Rindo only got involved in this incident. After all, at that time, Rindo also didn't know if Azumi had already gathered enough people. I see. I was wondering why someone with your personality would get involved. Forget it, this doesn't concern me. I still have other work to do. I'm leaving first. After speaking, Itsuya Aizen left. He runs pretty fast. In that case, I won't keep you company either. You guys can figure it out yourselves. Rindo Kobayashi also didn't bother with the others and directly took off. I wasn't involved in this matter, so I'll leave first. Satoshi Ishiki naturally understood what was going on, but he had no intention of explaining and just left. Ishiki, do you know what's going on? At least explain it to me, I wasn't involved either. Seeing Ishiki leave, Taranori Kuga also chased after him. Afterwards, Tosuke Megashima also left silently without wasting words. Azumi Nakiri had approached him, but he had directly refused. Watching people leave one by one, the expressions of the other Elite 10 members weren't good. They still hadn't figured out what exactly it meant. This was also normal. After all, if they could figure it out so quickly, they wouldn't have gotten involved in this matter in the first place. Their brains didn't turn as fast as Itsuya Aizen's. Of course, given some time, they would probably also figure it out. After all, the answer had already been slapped on their faces. Senzaman Nakiri naturally wouldn't bother much with the Elite 10's reactions. For him, the Elite 10 weren't that important. After all, every cohort had an Elite 10, why care so much about these few individuals? Besides, when the Jewel generation entered their second year, the Elite 10 seats would probably undergo a major reshuffle. The Jewel generation was not comparable to students from other cohorts. After leaving, Senzaman Nakiri also directly spread the news that Azumi Nakiri's surname was being revoked. And the WGO side also reacted. Mana Nakiri and Azumi Nakiri were still husband and wife. Logically speaking, to go through normal procedures, Mana wanting to get rid of Azumi would require her to use her privileges. But actually, it wasn't necessary. Don't forget, Azumi's private life these years had been very messy. Mana had all this evidence. Mana knew very well that Azumi definitely wouldn't submit obediently after being stripped of his surname.
So, she very decisively found someone to use this evidence to dissolve her marital relationship with Azumi. Thus, Azumi Nakiri no longer existed in the Nakiri family.
This world no longer had Azumi Nakiri, only Azumi Nakamura. Within one day, Azumi Nakamura could be said to have lost everything.
Although he still had a blood relationship with Irina Nakiri, Irina didn't acknowledge him, and there was nothing he could do. Using the pestering tactics of ordinary people on members of the Nakiri family was completely useless.
It could be said that Azumi Nakamura was finished. Now he had nothing. This was all his own doing. It still came to this in the end. That boy who admired Joichiro back then, what a pity. Jin Dojima shook his head upon receiving the news. Azumi Nakamura was their junior back then, also a member of Polar Star.
And Azumi's talent was second only to his and Joichiro's. If Azumi hadn't gone down the wrong path these years, then there was a high probability he would have surpassed Dojima. After all, Dojima had been distracted by work, and Azumi's talent wasn't far behind his. But because he went down the wrong path, he was ultimately kicked out by the Nakiri family. There was originally still hope of returning, but now, there was no hope at all. The Nakiri family had removed him from their records, and Mana Nakiri announced the dissolution of their marriage. It could be said the Nakiri family had decided to completely cut ties with Azumi. Under such circumstances, Azumi was destined to never see the light of day again.
He probably couldn't even be a midnight chef.
After all, the one Azumi challenged was Mana Nakiri.
Mana was WGO's sole special class officer. This officer's status relied on culinary skill. Joichiro, quick, look at this news.
If it were only the Nakiri family making this decision, it wouldn't cause too big a wave internationally. But once Mana Nakiri spoke, the nature of the matter changed. At this moment, Joichiro Yukihara was visiting a friend abroad, partly to catch up with an old friend, and partly to exchange culinary skills.
What news?
Joichiro was also somewhat surprised. He took the phone and glanced at it, only to see the news released by the Nakiri family and Mana Nakiri.
It's news about Azumi. What did this idiot do again to make the Nakiri family react strongly? He is pretty much finished. After seeing the news, Joichiro's first thought was that Azumi Nakamura must have caused some trouble again. Because back then, this guy was his little fanboy.
After Azumi instilled a bunch of wrong ideas into Irina Nakiri, Joichiro had been asked to help. It was also at that time that Joichiro became Irina's idol. Having had contact with Irina at that time, Joichiro naturally knew what Azumi had done.
But that wasn't enough for the Nakiri family to directly strip him of his surname. However, Joichiro also didn't think too much about it. Although Azumi was his fanboy, one still had to pay the price for doing wrong. It should have been like this long ago. That man staying in the Nakiri family was completely redundant.
At Nakiri International, So Nakiri also showed a smile upon receiving the news. Back then, he was one of the people who disliked Azumi Nakiri the most. If not for his younger sister and niece, he would have directly taken action. Now, seeing his father and sister make such a statement, he knew it meant Azumi Nakamura had been completely abandoned. As the saying goes, some are happy, some are sad.
At this moment, the saddest person was naturally Azumi Nakamura.
Just now, for some unknown reason, he received a flood of calls. Those people who had cooperated with him before all terminated their cooperation with him, not even giving him a chance to ask, directly blacklisting him. At first, he thought someone had gone crazy, but as the calls came one after another, Azumi was also dumbfounded. It wasn't until someone took pity on him and gave him a reminder that Azumi finally saw the news released by Mana Nakiri and Senzima Nakiri. In that instant, Azumi felt his world had collapsed.
Everything was clearly developing in a good direction. Why did it suddenly become like this? Soon, Azumi thought of a possibility, Yuki.
Because he had just called Yuki before, and Yuki had rebuked him and then blacklisted him. He guessed that he had told Yuki about his plan, and Yuki, having a good relationship with the Nakiri family, had exposed his affairs. Actually, Azumi had made a contingency plan from the beginning. He knew contacting Yuki was risky, but he hadn't expected Yuki to be this decisive.
Keep in mind, although Tosuke Megashima hadn't agreed to him before, he also hadn't exposed his plan. And another point, he found something was not quite right. Even if this plan of his was exposed, the Nakiri family shouldn't have reacted this strongly.
Only if Mana Nakiri and Irina Nakiri simultaneously abandoned him would Senzaman Nakiri strip him of his surname.
He didn't understand what exactly had happened to make Mana and Irina make such a choice.
This fool still didn't know that his every action had long since been thoroughly investigated by Mana. WGO, as the leading organization in the culinary world, had a sufficiently powerful intelligence system. All of Azumi Nakamura's information had already been thoroughly investigated.
After a long silence, Azumi Nakamura picked up his phone and made a call to someone.
Being abandoned by the Nakiri family, he still had a chance to make it in the international culinary world. But once abandoned by Mana, it meant he was finished. So, helplessly, he could only call Mana. Although he really didn't want to, this was the only way out now. He had to find out what exactly was going on. Soon, the call connected. This made him very happy because just now, when he wanted to call his friends to understand the situation, he had already been blacklisted by them. Even those two first-class officers at WGO with whom he had connections were no exception. Those two had already had their first-class officer positions revoked by Mana. Mana had quite a bit of dirt on these people. She herself wasn't a very magnanimous person, so she naturally wouldn't let these two off. Fortunately, with their abilities, surviving wouldn't be a big problem.
And only their first-class officer positions were revoked.
They weren't kicked out of WGO, so there was still a chance to climb back up.
They themselves also knew very well why their first-class officer positions were revoked.
After all, Mana had already cut ties with Azumi Nakamura, meaning she had completely given up on him. It was normal for them to be targeted.
You finally called, Azumi. The call connected. Mana Nakiri's one sentence left Azumi Nakamura somewhat dumbfounded.
Because Mana's words clearly meant she knew he would call, so she had been waiting for his call.
You should be very confused right now, about what exactly is going on. Originally, I didn't intend to explain it to you.
But for the sake of our past marriage, I'll let you understand what's going on.
I've sent you the things. See for yourself.
After saying this, Mana Nakiri hung up the phone. She had sent a copy of all the evidence she had collected to Azumi.
The more Azumi looked through it, the darker his face became.
He found that these years, Mana hadn't completely ignored him but had been paying attention to him all along. His actions these years had all been thoroughly investigated. Yes, the cause of the matter was indeed Mana, she chose to leave. But Mana hadn't messed up her private life like he did.
Mana had just been constantly looking for ways to solve the drawback of the god's tongue. And Azumi Nakamura?
After instilling a bunch of bizarre ideas into his daughter, he started fooling around everywhere.
These years, Azumi hadn't been seen doing anything productive.
Senzaman Nakiri and the others, to solve the god's tongue problem, spared no expense to form the Jewel Generation, trying every possible method. As for Azumi's philosophies, they were completely laughable. If such extreme ideas were useful, it would be a miracle.
It could be said Azumi Nakamura himself was completely twisted.
After reading these things, Azumi completely collapsed to the ground. He knew very well that Mana showing him these files was to make him give up completely. Sure enough, when he wanted to continue calling Mana, he found his number had already been blacklisted by her.
As for Irina Nakiri, after he had done these things, how could Irina forgive him?
And he had heard from those two first-class officers before that Irina was also at WGO and had already reconciled with Mana. That is to say, all of this was with Irina's consent.
This time, no matter who he sought, it would be useless. Chapter 99, First Class Chef, New Growth Bait Hall. Azumi Nakamura had absolutely no hope of rising again.
For the rest of his life, he could only choose to open a small shop and live on. With his culinary skills, although he couldn't become rich and famous, he wouldn't have to worry about food and clothing. For an average person, this peaceful life would be very good.
But for a mentally twisted person like Azumi, it was pure torture. Yuki obviously noticed this matter. Although he was somewhat puzzled why such a thing would happen, and why the Nakiri family showed Azumi no mercy at all, he couldn't be bothered to care. After all, this matter had nothing to do with him. He wished nothing more than for this Azumi fellow to suffer misfortune. This guy's performance in the original story was very disgusting. After Azumi's matter ended, WGO also returned to peace. Yuki continued to serve as a first-class officer. A few days later, Yuki's culinary skills finally reached first class in the systems panel. It had to be said, the system's standards were really high. Yuki's current culinary skills could easily crush any other first-class chef, and he wouldn't even be afraid of special-class chefs. But in the system's judgment, his culinary skills had only just reached first class. Furthermore, Yuki discovered that the division between first class and special class was actually the strength of one's culinary heart. According to the ranking system of the Food Wars world, as long as a first-class chef mastered culinary art, they would become a special-class chef. But in the system's classification, the strength of culinary heart needed to reach a certain level. The culinary heart strength required to enter special class was a percentage progress bar in the system. When this progress bar was filled, it meant his culinary heart strength had reached the special class level. As for now, Yuki found his culinary heart strength had just reached 30%, not even 1/3 yet. The stronger the culinary heart, the more the dishes made could move people's hearts. Yuki's culinary heart was a domineering type. Even the dishes he made now had an outstanding effect on those with weaker wills. If Yuki slightly enhanced his culinary heart in his dishes, he could make the other party completely obedient to him. So much so that after Yuki discovered this, he didn't infuse too much culinary heart into his dishes. He didn't imagine what level his dishes would reach when the progress bar was full. Different culinary hearts had completely different effects on people. Some could make people feel warm and happy, but Yuki's was different. His domineering culinary heart would directly conquer the other party. As for the effect, it all depended on the strength of his culinary heart and the willpower of the other party. After checking the extent of his culinary heart, Yuki began a new fishing session. After all, after reaching the first-class chef level, he had obtained another growth bait. Growth bait was good stuff. He currently had 3 growth-type abilities: Evolving Touch, Evolving Vision, and Inferno. Just now, when he became a first-class chef, he could clearly perceive the changes in his vision and touch. The change in his evolving touch made his control over his body even stronger. He could even freely control some changes in his hair now. For example, sometimes people's body hair would stand on end. Now Yuki could freely control this. He could even control his hair somewhat. Just like Sunny, one of the 4 heavenly kings in the world of Toriko. However, his control was still too weak. Although he could control his hair, at most, he can only make his hair dance without wind now. Wanting to achieve Sunny's precise control over every single strand of hair, and for each strand to possess hundreds of kilograms of strength, was impossible. Perhaps his evolving touch still needed to grow and transform several more times to reach that step. As for vision, Yuki found he could already see some of the aura emanating from people's bodies. Although very faint, he could indeed see it. His vision was also evolving towards the level of a Demon King's vision. Now Yuki's evolving touch and vision had undoubtedly already surpassed the levels of Super Touch and Supervision. As for Inferno, this ability was much simpler and cruder. Yuki could clearly sense that the temperature of the flames he now released was continuously rising. The benefits brought by growth bait were very significant. Now Yuki impatiently consumed the growth bait. He was very much looking forward to what he could fish out this time. Growth Type 5 senses were very useful. He already had 2, he hoped he could collect all 5 Growth Type senses. As the growth bait was consumed, soon, Yuki fished out something he was very familiar with. This thing, he had fished it out before, it was what transformed Inferno into an evolving ability. This time, it was also random. Time to see my luck again. Yuki used this chance. Soon, the result came out. This result made Yuki very happy. Because this time, the growth ability randomized was key.
It had to be said, Yuki's luck was indeed very good. Originally, what he most hoped would be transformed into a growth-type ability was Ki. Although he now had the help of Food Honor, and Ki's growth rate was much faster than before. Once this ability became growth-type, the subsequent improvement speed would not be comparable to before. To make a comparison, it would be the difference between a snail and a supercar. The moment the ability transformation was complete, Yuki felt the speed at which his Ki strengthened was constantly increasing. This speed of improvement is too exaggerated. Yuki felt somewhat emotional sensing the continuous strengthening of Ki within his body. The current improvement speed of Ki was completely incomparable to before. Yuki could perceive the changes in the Ki within his body every second. Soon, Yuki found that the Ki within his body seemed to have undergone some kind of qualitative change. The Ki, which had increased to a certain amount, suddenly decreased a lot. But Yuki could clearly perceive that the quality of Ki had increased significantly. Yuki knew very well that his Ki had already reached the next stage. The quality of Ki being different meant the things one could do were also different. First level Ki could only simply change the shape of ingredients and some of their effects. But as the quality of Ki continuously improved, the things different levels of Ki could do also became more and more exaggerated. His Ki could currently keep him afloat for a few minutes before being completely consumed. After testing his flying ability, once his Ki recovered, Yuki once again used Ki on ingredients. This time, besides the quality of the ingredients changing, something else was added to the information his vision fed back. That was, the shelf life of the ingredients became much longer. Ingredients that would originally spoil after only a few days, under the effect of Yuki's Ki, now had their preservation time extended to several months. Moreover, Yuki found this wasn't the limit. As he continuously infused Ki, the shelf life of the ingredients also continued to extend. Ultimately, the shelf life of the ingredients stopped at 1 year. It's not that the quantity is insufficient, but the quality is. To continue increasing the shelf life of ingredients, I need to continue improving the quality of Ki. Yuki discovered. After the ingredient's shelf life increased to 1 year, no matter how much more Ki he infused, the shelf life didn't change. This meant the strength of his Ki was insufficient. Now he already possessed the ability to extend preservation. Yuki still needed to continuously explore the magical aspects of Ki. His understanding of Ki was still too shallow. Having made a huge gain, Yuki was quite happy. He directly used Ki to make some dishes. This time, he didn't make dishes like Ganji's noodle dish or Seven Country Unification noodle dish but just some simple homestyle dishes. But because Ki was used, plus his culinary skills had improved a lot, this time, even the normal dishes he made could be eaten by Mana Nikiri. Although the god's tongue had gone out of control, it had also reached its limit. The god's tongue wasn't Yuki's growth-type ability, it couldn't achieve unlimited improvement. So, Yuki's current cooking had already completely surpassed the upper limit of the god's tongue. This made Mana Nikiri happy and extremely shocked at the same time. And, you should have also noticed, right? Yuki's growth speed. On the way back after eating, Mana Nikiri couldn't help but say. She needed to confirm if it was her own illusion. Yes. His growth speed is very fast, so fast it's hard to believe. And nodded. She obviously knew just how astonishing Yuki's growth speed was. Looks like it wasn't my illusion. Although father had told me before his growth speed was fast, I never expected it to be this fast. Truly incredible. Mana Nikiri sighed with immense emotion. She now finally understood why her father had always emphasized this point. Yuki's improvement speed was almost different every day. That was one thing, but the key was that Yuki would have a major leap forward every once in a while. This constantly challenged their common sense, which had now been shattered to pieces. Isn't this a good thing? He's destined to become the strongest in the culinary world. Now it's just a matter of reaching that level a bit earlier, and stated. Yuki himself was destined to become the leading figure in the culinary world. Now, the earlier he reached that level, the better. One reason was the god's tongue problem. Another reason was that after chefs reached special class, they were basically stuck. Everyone didn't know how to proceed further because the number of people who could reach the special class level was too small. Currently, in the entire culinary world, the number of existences whose culinary skills reached special class could be counted on one hand. Of course, this was on the surface. But even if you added those hidden ones, there were probably only about a dozen. Only a dozen or so chefs in the entire world had reached the special class level. Although they were exploring the path ahead, and even willing to exchange their experiences many times, it was still too difficult to figure out the path forward with just so few people. On the other side, Yuki received a piece of news he had been very concerned about from Hisako Arado. Among the commissions here at WGO, one suitable for Yuki concerning midnight chefs had appeared. This commission was issued by a very large-scale food company. And the midnight chef they were facing was named Sergeant Sarge. This woman, among the younger generation of midnight chefs, was quite famous. Her consistent method was to conquer others with her cooking. Anyone with even slightly weaker willpower would directly submit after eating her dishes. It sounded somewhat similar to Yuki's culinary heart, but Sarge hadn't mastered culinary heart. The reason she could do this was because of her special ability, armed dish. People who ate this dish could feel a strong sense of conquest, so people with weaker wills simply couldn't withstand it. Some special abilities had the effect of changing the eater's emotions. In the original story, Megumi Tadakoro's hospitality special ability had a similar effect. It was just that Megumi's wasn't conquest, but making people feel satisfied. Chapter 100, Midnight Chef, The Effects of Armed Dish. Sarge's special ability and Yuki's culinary heart had similar effects, but Sarge's ability had a lower ceiling and couldn't compare to culinary heart. From the information Hisako Arado gave him, Yuki discovered a problem: the current Sarge hadn't yet encountered Asahi Saiba. In the original story, she was defeated by Asahi and then wholeheartedly followed him. Now, Sarge was still using her armed dish to conquer far and wide. Some leaders of organizations, after eating her dishes, were directly conquered, offering themselves and their entire organizations to Sarge. Of course, this was also because Sarge's culinary skills were strong enough. As one of the top talents among the younger generation of midnight chefs, although she couldn't compare to a cheat player like Asahi Saiba, her culinary skills had already touched the edge of first-class chef. Becoming a first-class chef was only a matter of time for Sarge. Most importantly, although Sarge wasn't a first-class chef, she possessed the armed dish special ability. A chef with a special ability was much stronger than a chef without one. This commission was somewhat tricky even for those first-class officers, but Yuki accepted it without hesitation. It was rare to encounter an interesting opponent. Although he knew very well the other party was no match for him, providing a little nourishment was no problem. After accepting this commission, Yuki left WGO headquarters alone. After 2 days of travel, Yuki finally arrived at the location for the cooking battle. Unlike other first-class officers, who would bring many bodyguards when facing midnight chefs otherwise, if the other party played dirty, they might lose their lives. But Yuki was different. His combat power was terrifyingly strong, he didn't need to worry about this at all. As long as he didn't bring Irina Nakiri and Hisako Arado, and had no worries, Yuki was invincible. Moreover, Yuki also knew what kind of person Sarge was. Although Sarge's appearance in the original story wasn't long, her character was set. Even if there were some changes now that it was reality, such changes would only be minor. Yuki had spent so much time with the Polar Star residents. Their personalities were exactly the same as in the original story. Someone like Sarge disdained playing dirty tricks. This was also why Sarge, as a midnight chef running rampant, others couldn't do anything to her. Although midnight chefs were generally reviled in the culinary world, as long as the other party didn't commit crimes, you couldn't do anything to them. This world wasn't the world of Cooking Master Boy, there was no chef's alliance that controlled life and death. This world still played by the rules of law. So, as long as no crimes were committed, others were helpless. Facing challenges from midnight chefs, most organizations would accept. The reason was simple: if they refused, their reputation would suffer, and their businesses would also be affected. So, these organizations generally accepted when faced with challenges from midnight chefs, and then spent money to hire people from WGO to help. This way, they wouldn't lose anything. However, Sarge's cooking was rather special. Her special ability, armed dish, had a conquering effect. People with weak wills, when faced with such dishes, would easily be conquered. Sarge also relied on this method to build up a considerable following. First Class Officer Yuki, you finally arrived. The moment he saw Yuki, the owner named Cavino finally breathed a sigh of relief. News about Yuki from WGO had already spread everywhere. Everyone knew the dishes Yuki made could be eaten by Mananakiri, who would even say they were delicious. This was something no one else in the entire world could achieve, not even those special class chefs. It could be said that Yuki was definitely the strongest among first-class officers. With Yuki's help, he no longer worried about Sarge's challenge. Mr. Cavino, a pleasure to meet you. Please leave the upcoming cooking battle to me, Yuki said with a smile. He could see that Cavino was very excited and could also see he had been very nervous before. Clearly, Sarge had brought him considerable pressure. Hearing Yuki's words, Cavino smiled. With Yuki's assurance, he was relieved. Afterwards, Yuki enjoyed the highest level of treatment arranged by Cavino. Early the next morning, the time for the duel with Sarge had arrived. Both parties came to the prepared venue. This battle had no specific theme. This type of competition actually had a high degree of freedom because everyone had their own specialty dishes and also very special abilities. So, for competitions at this level, either the theme range was very large, like meat dishes, noodle dishes, etc., or there was no theme at all. Chefs wouldn't lose a match just because they weren't good at a particular theme. After arriving at the competition venue, Yuki saw Sarge. A purple military uniform perfectly showcased her well-proportioned figure. She wore a military cap on her long blue hair. Her right hand held a special kitchen knife resembling a chainsaw, slung over her shoulder. At first glance, Yuki almost thought his death from Akane Ga Kill had transmigrated. Sarge's attire, plus this queen-like aura, was quite impressive, like a budget version of his death. Just like the rumors. So young to become a first-class officer, and famous too. Sarge naturally saw Yuki. Regarding Yuki, any chef nowadays knew about him. After all, Yuki was now a first-class officer and had made a very prominent name for himself at WGO. His existence was hailed as the strongest genius in the culinary world and a quasi-strongest contender. The reason he was quasi-strongest and not strongest was because Yuki hadn't competed with a special class chef yet. But the dishes he made could be eaten by Mananakiri, something special class chefs couldn't achieve. So, Yuki now had the title of quasi-strongest. His existence made many chefs eager to try their hand. Many chefs tried to challenge Yuki, using him as a stepping stone to reach the top in one go. However, Yuki wasn't interested in most of these people and directly refused their challenges. And as Yuki's battle records against second and first class officers were exposed, gradually, no one dared to challenge Yuki anymore. If it were before, they might still think Yuki's title was obtained through connections, a deliberate operation by WGO. But as Yuki defeated these opponents time and time again, they all shut up. After all, not many second and first class officers would use their own reputation to act alongside Yuki. So, this battle record was naturally genuine. Learning that even first class officers were no match for Yuki, not many wants to continue challenging him. Sarge had known who her opponent would be as soon as Yuki accepted this commission. After learning her opponent was Yuki, Sarge, far from being afraid, was actually very excited. After all, Yuki's reputation was so great. If she defeated him, it would be a good thing for her. As for whether she could win, she was still very confident in herself. Although Yuki's battle record was there, she wasn't so easily intimidated by a track record. As long as Yuki hadn't directly defeated a special class chef, she would choose to clash with Yuki. So, these past few days, she had also made ample preparations, just waiting to settle the score with Yuki. Sarge was quite a bit older than Yuki. Yuki, after all, was still just a first-year Totsuki student, only 16 years old, while Sarge was already in her 20s. No need for pleasantries, Ms. Sarge, Yuki said with a smile. He didn't intend to waste words here but planned to get straight to the point. He was quite interested in Sarge's armed dish. In the original story, Sarge not only used a chainsaw when cooking but also a detonator. Her kitchen utensils were one stranger than the next. It would be a lie for Yuki to say he wasn't interested. During this time, Yuki had seen many special abilities at WGO, but Sarge's type of ability was very rare. Yuki felt that so-called special abilities should be divided into two main categories. One was the most numerous, abilities similar to Megumi Tadakoro's hospitality. There were no special manifestations when cooking, one could only feel it after tasting the dish. The other category was rarer, like Sarge's armed dish, which could be seen from the cooking methods and utensils used. You're quite direct. In that case, let's begin. Sarge also didn't waste words. She quite liked Yuki's straightforwardness. In previous competitions with other opponents, many looked at her with the wrong kind of eyes, filled with possessiveness. It was precisely because of this that those people would constantly try to chat her up, which made her very uncomfortable. Yuki's forthright personality, on the other hand, she quite appreciated. Before we begin, there's one more thing. Due to the reputation of your dishes, Ms. Sarge, no one is willing to be a judge for this match. So, my suggestion is, how about we act as judges for each other? Yuki proposed. Sarge's dishes, due to her special ability armed dish, had a very special conquering effect, so no one was willing to be a judge. This couldn't be helped. After all, no one dared to bet on whether they would be affected and end up groveling at her feet. That's a good proposal. It would be quite nice to conquer you, the number one genius of the culinary world. Sarge wasn't surprised by this. She knew very well the effect of her dishes. Upon hearing Yuki's proposal, she had no objections. As for whether they would have disagreements, she was still very confident in her own dishes, so she wasn't worried. Conquer me? I'll be waiting. Yuki didn't make any harsh remarks. Wanting to conquer him, wasn't that a joke? His culinary heart was the most domineering kind. If anyone was going to conquer, it would be him conquering Sarge, not the other way around. After they finished speaking, they began to select their ingredients. There were many spectators in the venue watching their competition. After all, both Sarge and Yuki were very famous, especially Yuki. Most of the people here came for Yuki. After glancing at the ingredients in the ingredient area, Yuki selected what he needed. As for Sarge, after selecting her ingredients, she also took out various strangely shaped kitchen utensils. At this moment, the ingredient Yuki selected was a huge sea bream. The dish Yuki planned to make this time was the true sea bream map. This dish could best embody his culinary heart. This time, Yuki didn't plan to hold back. He wanted to see if his culinary heart could suppress Sarge's special ability. The ingredient Sarge chose was Black Forest ham. As for what dish she planned to make with Black Forest ham, Yuki wasn't very clear. The 7-star knives could easily process the sea bream. As the 7-star flash severing knife dance was performed, everyone's attention was drawn to it. Although Sarge's various bizarre kitchen utensils were very attractive, Yuki's operation was undoubtedly more of a visual feast. Even Sarge, who was cutting meat with a chainsaw, had her attention drawn. With her eye, she could tell that Yuki's every cut was precise to the extreme. And the knives in his hand were constantly changing. The different knives used also perfectly suited the fish's body. After Yuki finished processing the fish, everyone then retracted their gazes. Sarge retracted her gaze and focused on her own dish. Being able to control so many kitchen knives at once, he seems a bit like you. Among the audience, a man looked at his companion beside him and said, "There's still a difference. His knives are clearly a complete set. And their sharpness is very high. He easily cut off those fish scales with just a knife." The speaker was Asahi Saiba. He had originally come here for Sarge, but Yuki's appearance interested him more.
Especially after seeing Yuki's 7-star knives, Asahi Saiba looked as if he had seen top-grade prey. After all, his special ability, cross knives, worked by obtaining others' kitchen knives to replicate their dishes, even being able to copy special abilities. As the final boss, this ability was undoubtedly very suitable. If the effect wasn't overpowered, how could it become the ability of the final boss? Looks like you've set your sights on his knives. But to get his knives, you still need to defeat him first. And to defeat this monster isn't that easy. The companion beside him said. Yuki's battle record was too brilliant. Although Asahi Saiba could defeat first-class chefs by relying on his cross knives ability, Yuki's undefeated record was somewhat alarming. Isn't someone already scouting ahead? Let's watch first and then see. Asahi Saiba stated. He indeed coveted Yuki's knives, but he also knew his limits. So, he planned to observe the situation first. That wraps up this part of What If Fishing System in Food Wars World. Thanks so much for listening. As always, new parts drop every 4 days, so be sure to stay tuned. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and please consider supporting the original author as well. See you in the next one.